Hey, welcome to the Connected Mom podcast, where we have real conversations helping you to connect more deeply with God, more empathically with your fellow moms, and more intentionally with your child. I am Becky Harling, your host, and I am excited about today's conversation because, for those of us that are now empty nesters, mothering is still a thing. However, it looks a lot different than it did when we had our kids in our home. And sometimes that stirs up a lot of emotions for us as empty nesters. And so we're going to dive into that conversation today. My guest is my friend Jill Savage. She is the author of 12 different books. She was the founder of Hearts at Home. That was a huge conference that ran, I think, until 2017. And now she has her own podcast, and you're just going to love her. So for those of you moms where your kids are no longer in the home, I want you to lean in and listen, because this episode is going to be filled with wisdom that I know you need. And so welcome, Jill. It's delightful to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Becky.
It's so fun. And so, okay, before we get into the nest being empty, tell us about when your nest was full. I mean, how many kids do you have? Tell us about your family.
Yep, 5 kids,
That's
four
a lot.
biological. It is a lot. Four biological, one adopted. They ranged about 13 years age difference. So I said at different points, I had one in preschool, one in grade school, one in junior high, one in high school, and one in college. I was potty training and driver's training at the same time.
That deserves some kind of like award. There should be a
I
certificate or
know.
degree for that, right?
I
Because those are the
agree.
two hardest stages, potty training and driver's training. Both give moms a lot of anxiety. So, yeah. So, 5 kids is a lot. I mean, we had 4 kids, and I remember there were nights where Steve and I would lay in bed and he would lean over and he would sigh and he would say, Becky, 4 kids is a lot. And I would say, I know, babe, but we're doing it. And, it's going. And we would pray over, and we loved the whole adventure of it. But, some nights you definitely do go to bed exhausted. And then, for some parents, they're like, okay, in a few years, it's just going to be my husband and I. It's going to be like a second honeymoon. So, but then they get there and there's a whole host of emotions. So, what was that transition like for you?
Because really I had been actively parenting. I think when I figured it out, it was like 34 years or something like that, by the time the last one left. And it's a long time, right? And so on one hand, I was like, okay, I'm looking forward to actually just kind of having my own life, not having the weight of the daily parts of parenting, not carrying that weight. So, and on one hand, I was looking forward to it. On the other hand, it was all I knew. I mean, Mark and we got married when I was 19. We had our first baby when I was 20. That's all I had been doing. And so I really thought, am I going to be okay? And here's the thing. Here's what happened for me. So our youngest son left the nest. Literally, he graduated from college December and got married 2 weeks later. So he graduated midterm
Wow.
and then
Yeah.
got married. And that spring, I was like, I like to say that empty nest moms are either woohooers or boohooers. At that point, I borrowed that from Kathy Lipp. I heard her say that once, and I loved that. And for me, I was a woohooer at that point in time because I was like, oh my gosh, wow, this is what life is like on the other side, But I got to August and everybody was getting kids ready to go back to school. And I didn't have anybody to get ready to go back to school. And that's when it hit me, Becky. It was delayed. It really was. So then I moved from being a woohooer to being a boohooer because I was like, I don't even know what to do here because I'm so accustomed to getting somebody ready to get back to school supplies. So I felt left out of what everybody else was doing. And so that was tough for me. And so that's when the emotions kind of started for me, where I really started to kind of go through a little bit more grief. I began to understand that feeling of both gain, but also loss.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times the grieving process catches moms off guard, right? But it is a grieving because you are letting go. Your role completely changes, right? I mean, when they're in your home, you give guidance, you give direction at times. When they're out of your home, when they become adults, your whole role changes. And I think for moms, like I know for myself, I loved being a mom. You probably did too, right? So a lot of who I was rooted in motherhood. And I'm actually glad for me along the way that I started Bible teaching and, teaching seminars and things like that. Because if I hadn't, it would have been awful for me when my kids moved out,
I agree.
because I loved that season. So how do moms grieve this well without becoming whiny with their kids that have left home?
I think that part of it is we have to have a balance that it is both loss and gain. I think what happens is too many of us focus on the loss and we miss the gain. We miss we miss the transition. I think it's important to remember that raising children is one season of life. It's not our whole life. It's one season of life. And it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time. But now we have this other season that we get to do something with. So that's the gain. And the other part of the gain is seeing your kids begin to live their own life, figure out their own path, become adults that you get to continue to have a precious relationship with. Yes, it will be different. Maybe start families of their own. Maybe you will eventually have grandchildren. Maybe you can begin to pursue some sort of a passion that's kind of always been sitting in the background, but you never had the time or the energy or even the money for. I mean, after kids leave the home, you get a raise.
Supposedly, except until grandchildren come along. And then that's another whole area of your budget, at least for me. But I want to go back to something you said, because I think one thing that is practical and very helpful for moms, when they're in this season of a sort of grieving, is to pursue some type of growth for them. I know for me, when our kids all started getting married, and when the last one got married, and I went for my John Maxwell coaching training, and it was so wonderful to rediscover my brain. Oh, there is a brain after motherhood, because sometimes you think you've lost your brain when you're raising all your kids. There's that old joke that when you give birth, your brain comes out with the placenta. And, it was just great for me to focus on learning and growing as a person apart from my kids.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And that is pursuing that passion that was there. And now was the right time for it, right? You were able to go, okay, this has been on the back burner, but now it's time for me to be able to pursue that. And sometimes, I guess let's speak to the lady out there the mom out there that's going, I don't even know what I like. And so she may have to go through a season of trying a lot of different things. Give something physical a try, like pickleball.
That's a growing rage right now.
Oh my gosh, it is, isn't it? Try a a Bible study, try your hand at a class, maybe decide to go back to school, all, like you did, get certified as a coach. I mean, there's just all kinds of possibilities. So you may have to try you may have a year of trying some different things and stepping back and going, do I love this? Do I not love this? And that's okay too.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about something hard when your kids leave home. For many moms, holidays, I mean, it's just a whole thing, right? And, as moms, especially for those of us that really loved the holidays, I mean, I was honestly the holiday queen, right? I mean, I couldn't wait to get the tree up at Christmas. Every holiday was a grand celebration at our house. Well, then your kids get married and there's two families to deal with, and you can't have every holiday, and things change. So, walk us through that. How do we help our adult kids with that? And how do we help ourselves not, sink into a pit of tears?
And that is one of the places where the grief will first show up too, is those holidays, because they will likely be different in some way, shape, or form. I am one of the things that Mark and I learned early on, and I believe that, I had to grieve it first, but I believe that it is key to making the holidays enjoyable for everyone. And I really think that as we need to give our kids the gift of holiday freedom.
I love that. Say that again, Jill.
We need to give our kids the gift of holiday freedom.
Amen.
What I mean by that is, first, the day that you celebrate does not matter. We stop getting attached to that Thursday that everybody seems to celebrate Thanksgiving, which, by the way, everybody doesn't on that Thursday. And so maybe you do it the Friday after, maybe you do it the Saturday after. Same with Christmas. Yes, I know Christmas morning was precious and I know it was magical and all of that. But maybe Christmas looks like a quiet day for you if you're a single parent, for you and your husband if you're married, and the family gathers at another time. So that is the first part of it, is change your expectations of what that holiday is going to look like and when it's going to happen. The when isn't nearly as important as your kids get older, because they do get pulled in so many different ways. But the second part is that we also need to give the gift of holiday freedom, that if they can't figure out a way to make it, then we have to be okay with that. We have to recognize that they are managing all the demands on their life. They are managing their energy. They are managing the dynamics of their family as they start to have children. They're managing all of that. And there may be years that they have to say, I wish I could be there, but we just can't make it this year. And man, that's hard for us. That is hard for us mamas. But man, in those moments, we have to be able to say, I am so sorry that you're not going to be able to make it. You will be greatly missed, but we understand and we love you.
Yeah, because I think I learned quickly that if you put pressure on your kids, they begin to resent that and they don't want to come. So the best thing I say to my kids is, hey, I want you to feel invited to this, but not pressured, because I realize you have your own kids, you have the other side of the family. And for my kids, if they feel pressured, they want to back up. And that's just a truth in life. And so we have to be careful of that as moms, because yeah, you adore your kids and you want to be with them. And I get that. And you may want things to be quote unquote fair, either with the in laws, or if there's a divorce situation, you want it to be fair between, husband and wife and all of that. But just be really careful, because when you put a lot lot of pressure on your kids, you're going to get pushback and you're going to get resistance to the very thing that you really want.
I'd like to say invitation without expectation.
That's great. Invitation without expectation is huge for your kids. Okay, let's talk a little bit about idolatry. Now, to those of you listening, you might be like, wow, Becky's out in left field. Not really, because I think that here in the West, particularly, and even in our evangelical culture, we have at times been guilty of making our children idols because we want to parent them perfectly. We want to protect them from anything and everything. And they have become the center of our lives. But that is not biblical, is it, Jill?
No, it isn't. So in my Empty Nest Full Life book, I split it into two parts, and I split it into the things that we need to let go of and the things that we need to hold on to. And in the things that we need to let go of, we need to let go of our idols. And that is when we have utilized our kids to primarily to feel good about ourselves. And so they're like if their behavior is good, if their choices are good, then we feel good about ourselves. And let me tell you, as they become adults, you will have moments, even the best of us have moments where we go, I didn't raise you that way, right? And so if you have your self-worth wrapped around the choices that they're making, then that is an idol. And so we have all kinds of idols with our children, because what happens with an idol is we worship it, right? We worship it instead of worshiping God. Like it becomes bigger than God. And so some of the idols that I think empty nest mamas struggle with is worry. Well, how is worry an idol? Well, worry is the worship of our circumstances. And so it becomes an idol. I think that we try to control, and control becomes an idol. Obviously, our identity, as I already said, that becomes an idol. And, here's the thing. We wrap if our kids are making good choices and maybe they have good jobs, we feel good about ourselves. But if our kids are making bad choices or they're struggling, then we often feel bad about ourselves. And that's when we know that we are dealing with some idols in our life. We really have to let go of those.
Yeah, I think there has to be a bit of differentiation. We talk about kids differentiating from parents when they grow up and move out of the home. But as mamas, we need to do some differentiation too, right? Where we are not, where my child's fears are not my fears per se, where my child's troubles are not necessarily my trials. I can pray for them. And I hope you do. I think that's one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids. But we can't be so enmeshed with them that every time they have a worry, we have a worry, right? So, and we need to keep our focus on worshiping God and drawing our deepest sense of self from Him, because it's only His love completely that can satisfy us. So, as your kids become adults and move out, how do we love them well? How do we cultivate the type of relationship we want with them, Jill?
Every kid is different. I think it's really important to understand that because, some of your kids you may talk to on a regular basis. Some of your kids you may, my daughters I talk to several times a week. I have one son that I talk to about once every 2 weeks, another one that I talk to about once every 3 weeks, and another one that I talk to about once a month. And and that's all normal. Like that's normal for them. Right? And so part of it is being okay and getting rid of expectations that connection needs to look a certain way. Because again, then we get into that pressure thing. And so it's also making ourselves available, but not enabling. That's a piece of it. And then I would say another one is stepping into their world, getting to know their world a little bit more, not expecting them to always be coming back home, but for you to step into their world. We have a son that lives in Australia. He has been there now 6 years. And so, at first he was only supposed to be there a year. And so we weren't, thinking, well, we'll make a trip. And then it became evident he was staying longer. And it was like, oh, we've got to figure out a way to get there. And I love that we've been there several times and gotten to know his friends. So when he talks about his friends, we know who he's talking about. We've been in his home, we know. So, that's easy to do when your kids just live down the street. But sometimes when they live across the country or they do live internationally, it's not as easy. And so we have to do things to step into their world.
I love that you brought that up. I know for me, Jill, in this season of life, right, all my kids are adults. We have 4 kids, married, and 14 grandchildren. And I am learning to treasure each moment, right? So my 3 goals is to listen well in this season, to love them well, and to pray well. And so I keep reminding myself of those 3 goals. So when a daughter calls and is telling me something, I want to give them my undivided attention, and I want to really listen well, not to advise because they would hang up, just to listen well, and to affirm and to know what's going on in their world and to love them well, to understand when they are going through a really crazy busy season and they can't stay in touch as well, or to understand, I always have my ears tuned for, okay, Lord, where do you want me to be praying for this particular child of mine or their spouse or their kids, and then one thing that I think is really important as our kids grow up and get married is loving their spouse as well. So let's talk about that a little bit too. How have you learned to love your kids' spouse as well?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that I think, and this like indirectly loves your spouse as well, is, you were talking about praying, and you also said not to share your opinion. Man, a lot of moms struggle with that because, hey, we've leveraged our opinion about their life for 20 years. And now we can't. No, we can't. We cannot. And so part of that is recognizing if they ask, by all means, we can share wisdom, we can share our thoughts. But if they don't ask, then what I like to say is we need to pray, don't say. We need to pray, don't say. And that becomes a part of also loving their spouse well. Because that spouse, there's nothing more frustrating than the spouse to know that their partner is frustrated with a meddling mother, a mother that can't keep her opinions to herself. So that is a place and a way that we can love our kids' spouses well. I think another way is, just really getting to know them as a person, learning a little bit more about who they are, engaging in understanding their world, their upbringing, their dynamics, and then just serving their family well. We started something that probably about 2 or 3 years ago. We decided that we were going to start taking each of, so we have, 3 married kids. And so 3 of our 5 are married. And then we have 6 grandkids. And so we decided that Mark and I decided, and they all live near us except for our son that lives in Australia. We were like, you know what? For their birthdays, let's take them out individually for their birthdays. So we do that with our son-in-laws and our daughter-in-law. Where we take them out and just get to know them one-on-one. That's kind of unique. And honestly, at first it felt a little odd that we were doing that without our their spouse, our daughter, our son. But it really has proven to be a great way to have some good conversation with them and get to know them even more as a person.
Yeah, I love that idea. And one of the things that Steve and I have done is we've tried to build up and really affirm each. My kids call them the Marians. So, they'll say, oh, the Marians are all smarter than us, or the Marians, and the Marians are wonderful, and so we always rave about them. We say, hey, I am so thankful you married so and so, and I am so grateful for you, and I love you so much. And my husband still calls his three daughters princess. So he calls his daughter-in-law princess, and he'll say, hey, princess, how are you? And we just want them to know how loved they are and that we appreciate them. I don't know what it was like for you, Jill, but when I got married to my husband, my mother was very challenging with him. And I vowed to the Lord that I would not be that way. So anybody that married into my family, I wanted my kids to know I love your spouse. I have prayed for your spouse for you and love your spouse, and I will do everything I can to build that up. Because I want them to know that, there's nothing worse than feeling like your parents are not for the person you married. I mean, that's going to pull your kids' marriages apart. And think about it. At the end of the day, you don't want your kids to have to go through divorce. So do everything you can to build them up, right?
Absolutely.
And then when they start having children, that brings another whole dynamic into it. And I love being a grandmother. I mean, anybody that knows me knows I talk about my grandchildren probably more than anything in the world. In fact, when I became a grandmother, I told my kids very boldly, you are now the B team. The grandkids are the A team, but no matter how great your kids are, there will be things that they do differently than you did, and so that's another realm where we have to keep our mouths shut, right, Jill? Do you have any stories about that?
I sure do. It's so interesting because when our granddaughter, one of our granddaughters was born, our daughter and her husband lived in Texas. We live in Illinois. And our daughter had asked us to come about 2 weeks after the baby was born. She was premature, and so she said, could you come 2 weeks after? And I was in church right after Marie was born, and somebody walked up to me and they said, oh, are you headed out to Texas this week? I saw that Erica had the baby. And I said, no, Erica has asked us to wait a couple of weeks and then we're heading out there. And and I'll never forget what she said. She said, well, didn't you tell her it's grandmother's prerogative to be there? I walked away from that conversation and I thought, wow. And I really kind of mulled that quite a bit. And both of my daughters had told me kind of horror stories of some of their friends where the mom would come in and take over. The mom would not put the kids to bed at the time that, if they were keeping the kids overnight. It started to cause issues in the relationship. And then the grandma's going, my kids are keeping the grandkids from me, when the reason is she operated under grandma's prerogative instead of honoring the way that this new family was operating. And so I remember walking away and thinking, there's never grandma's prerogative. There's mom and dad's prerogative.
Yeah, and we have to respect our kids' boundaries, and it's so important as they become adults. Well, we are almost out of time, Jill, but I want to hear from you. What is your favorite verse to pray on behalf of your kids or your grandkids or both?
My favorite verse is honestly Philippians 4:13, which is, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But I like to pray that for my kids and my grandkids, that they will remember that God is their strength, that they they can do probably more than they realize they can do, and that they will come to understand that He is the gap filler in their life, that they will come to know Him as their Lord and their Savior. And so that one is a favorite of mine.
I love that. Hey, thanks so much, Jill. This has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could go on for hours talking, but we won't keep our listeners quite that long. But, moms out there who have been listening, this conversation was so important for those of you who are either empty nesters now or you're getting ready to be an empty nester. And I hope that you wrote down some of the amazing things that Jill said, about giving your kids the gift of freedom on the holidays and just really loving them well, not giving them advice but praying for them, and maybe prioritizing personal growth in your own life as you become an empty nester so that you have something other than just your kids in your life. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation today, and I hope you'll join us next week for another conversation where we'll help you connect more deeply with God, more empathically with your fellow moms, and more intentionally with your child. And hey, if you liked today's episode, would you share it? And Jill, before we close, really quickly, where can our listeners get in touch with you?
They can find me on my website, which is jillsavage.org. And I also have a special website for empty nesters, and that is emptynestbook.com. They can learn there about the book. They can learn about the mom retreat that I do for empty nest moms. They can learn about all the resources I offer for empty nest moms.
Well, that is great. We will have all of that in the show notes for you today. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll have another conversation next week.